Day 127 to 6:35 p.m. Hamilton Commons, Mays Landing, Hamilton Township, New Jersey, United States of America. Bam. Crash. Boom. Different loud sounds echoed across the compound of Hamilton Commons. The gunshots and explosion of grenades before, now, it was the sound of breaking cement, thrown vehicles, and exploding cars. Outside the wall of miasma isolating the compound, the infected started to gather. The loud sounds were enough to attract them in droves, but what they could not resist even more was the thick magical energy emanating from the area. Most of them dived through the wall of miasma, only to get a few steps through before they slumped into a rotting pile of flesh. The mutated ones could enter further, but the result was the same. Nevertheless, it was quite dangerous as there seemed to be some that managed to last longer than the others. It would not be surprising if any of them mutated because of the miasma if any of them managed to last enough time to mutate. On the other hand, evolved animals in the area started to flee in fear, with the exception of feral ones, of course. The pressure from two terrifying beings was not something that they would be able to withstand. While the most evolved animals fled, however, the feral ones started a riot. With many infected gathering in the area, the feral evolved animals saw this as a hunting ground. They started to attack the infected. The infected did the same as they spotted the non-infected animals. Outside the walls of miasma, it became a battlefield of its own. Inside, it already became a dump of chaos. The raiders already retreated as far as they could from the battle zone of the two non-human beings. It was something that humans like them could not interfere with anymore. Nevertheless, none of them tried to hide or escape. Everyone here realized that doing those were futile. They could not go anywhere in the first place. They saw what happened when the enemy killed one of them using that ball of smoke. Going through the swaying black wall could result in the same ending for them. Thus, they could only watch the battle that could decide their survival. Nevertheless, inside their minds, they wondered where things had gone wrong. They could not remember how they offended this enemy they were facing now. Was it because of Kesser? But Kesser was already dead, and the ones here knew nothing of their plans. No, they knew. It was just that the ones remaining did not participate in it. Nevertheless, this should not warrant their deaths, right? You all must be wondering why. As if their thoughts were being read. The enemy who was currently avoiding the one-sided attacks of Gregor spoke to them. Then, I guess, it's fine to tell, since all of you will die anyway. Mark said with a grim smile. How was it, watching my wife with indecent thoughts? That question did not ring a bell to most of them. However, the lookouts during the afternoon and even Lady Amelie froze. To think that this threat was brought by them. We are only looking, what is wrong with that? One of the raiders that were guilty of the accusation stood up bravely to find a way out. However, he could only shiver and fall on his butt as he received the direct killing intent from Mark. Just looking is fine to some extent. But your indecent thoughts are not. My wife had some emotional and mental scars, you all see. She's very sensitive to that kind of stares, and you all pretty much reminded her of what she wanted to forget. That is enough for me to kill you all. It was way better than the likes of you who killed others for fun, isn't it? Mark said with a smiling face. Nevertheless, from that smile, they could see their demise. Gregor was already being frustrated in this battle. The enemy never attacked him even once, but none of his attacks were hitting. As fast as a bullet, Gregor swept across the parking area, picking up and throwing cars at the enemy. Most of the cars only crashed on the concrete, of course. Some managed to explode, and those were the vehicles that were used by the men of Kesser earlier. And every time that a vehicle exploded, Gregor could see the eyebrows of the enemy twitching in annoyance for some reason. Nevertheless, there was really nothing Gregor could do now. He was already lacking the options for attacking. In the first place, Jersey Devils were feared because of their superhuman strength and speed. Using those, they could trample and kill humans. But in fact, Jersey Devils were easier to kill than most have thought. They had strength and speed. Their muscles were thick, and most weapons humans had would not easily work on them. However, unlike dragons, their bodies were not covered in thick, impervious scales. A small pistol could kill them if they got hit in vital areas. Furthermore, Jersey Devils were not known to have any inhumane regeneration abilities. Their wounds needed to heal as normal people did. After all, Jersey Devils were not a race of magical demons. They originated from a curse on a newborn child. The 13th child of a family. A curse that many families around New Jersey had to bear. It was not all families, of course, and only those that lived around the forest for some reason. It was very rare to happen, especially in modern times. Who in the right mind would have 13 children in these times, anyway? Furthermore, each instance would result in at least the death of the mother. At worst, the whole family would be massacred. However, the common people never knew of it because the instances that had happened were being suppressed by the government, not allowing the news to be known by the public. Only the first instance was known, and it was made to turn into a folklore story used to scare children. In the past few years, no incidents like this happened. The last one recorded was 25 years ago. That one was Gregor. It could not be confirmed if he was the only Jersey Devil still living. Nevertheless, before the outbreak, rumors and sightings of Jersey Devils were still circulating here and there. There might be a chance that there were others out there. Mark watched the Jersey Devil in front of him attack relentlessly. Sure enough, the repertoire of this kind of creature relied on physical attacks. Jersey Devils were physical demons, even considered as a cryptid. They did not have powerful magical abilities. That roar was the only ability known to exist outside of its transformation abilities, superhuman strength, and superhuman speed. And when none of those worked, the Jersey Devil could easily be subdued. It was very rare to happen since there were no normal humans that would be able to contend with the physical abilities of a demon, like the Jersey Devil. The strength and speed of this man called Gregor were commendable. Even Mark had to carefully keep an eye on him while using the enhancing ability of his blood through his eyes to keep up with his speed. That was the reason his eyes were glowing red all this time. On top of that, he was using his empathic ability to pressure the raiders. That surprise attack earlier was dangerous, after all. If Mark did not protect his vital areas, although he would not die, he would be incapacitated for a while. That was a bad thing. And that man he killed, that was not just a warning. That bastard shot at his manhood. Anyone would be ticked off if that was the case. Also, Mark was not numb to pain. Those bullets boring holes in his flesh hurt like hell. However, he could not and would not show any sign of weakness towards his enemies. Mark could tell that Gregor was already frustrated. He started to wonder if he should kill this guy or add him to his collection. If it was the latter, it would be hard to subdue this guy. Then, Mark's eyes turned to the blonde woman among the raiders. She seemed to be someone important to his Jersey Devil. But then, as Mark did that, he was able to feel that Gregor started to fear for something. In haste, Gregor tore off the gas tank of one of the motorcycles and threw the gas tank at Mark with great strength. However, instead of hitting him, the gas tank fell in front of him, causing the gas to leak and the metal scraping at the cement to ignite it. The gas tank exploded in front of Mark, forcing him to retreat a bit. His shadow mist movement could allow him to pass through any gap in space, no matter how small it was as long as he could see it. However, in an instance of an explosion, the heated gas was everywhere. It was one of the weaknesses of this ability. If not for that, he would have no reason to dodge explosions. Amidst his dodge, however, his vision was obscured. He started to become alert of any incoming attack as Gregor was not in his view anymore. That was when he realized Gregor was not aiming for another attack. Even with his obscured vision, he could feel Gregor's mental fluctuations sweeping towards that woman within the raiders. With great speed, Mark kicked the ground and moved around the explosion. Mark could only scratch his head as he watched Gregor flew away with the woman and the man with annoying-looking eyes. Flying with the speed of a bullet, Gregor managed to get a wide distance away before Mark realized his intentions. What a bummer. Next time, I should also cover the sky. That was what Mark said as he watched the Jersey Devil fly away. Nevertheless, it was not possible to do either. If he covered the sky with miasma, everything inside would be pitch black. Even Mark would not be able to do much in that darkness. However, Mark was not keen on chasing Gregor either. In the first place, it was obvious that he was not one of the offenders this time. They might have killed people before, but it was not Mark's job to punish them for that. He was also feeling too lazy to chase a creature constantly flying at bullet's speed. Even Mark's natural flying speed would be able to keep up with that. He could use his blood to enhance his flight, but it would last shorter compared to Gregor's stamina. It would also give the real culprits a chance to escape since he would not be able to maintain the wall of miasma if he flew too far away. Still, that woman seemed to be one that ogled on May since she also reacted fiercely on Mark's reason for attacking them. Never mind. I'll let them go this time. The Jersey Devils are pitiful anyway. That was right, the Jersey Devils were pitiful creatures. In the first place, they came from a human family. However, they were turned into a creature like that because of a curse. With those thoughts, Mark turned to the people in front of him. They were all shouting towards Gregor, who escaped with only 2 people with him. These people were cursing the 3 that escaped without holding back. Now then, what should I do with all of you? You people had been abandoned. Mark said with a sinister smile. It made the remaining raiders freeze in fear. And the first one appeared. He kneeled in front of Mark. Sir, I'm not one of those you are talking about. Please, don't kill me. But then, Mark kicked the man's shoulder. The man rolled several times away, with his arm bent in the wrong direction. Ah! The man wailed in agony. That was when Mark approached him and picked him up, grabbing his neck. Do you really think that I won't realize your lie? The man stared to Mark, wide-eyed, filled with tears, and with nose dripping with snot. To think that the first one to beg for his life was a liar. You people are less than garbage. That was right. This person was one of the people that reacted strongly when Mark said his reason. His reaction was even stronger than anyone here, and yet, he was the first person to deny his offense. What a thick face! Mark said as he bent down, scraping the man's face on the rough cement until it bled. With his throat being choked tightly, he could not even scream in pain. The others watched in horror as the torment began. Day 127 to 6:40 p.m., Hamilton Commons, Mays Landing, Hamilton Township, New Jersey, United States of America. The battle between Gregor and Mark ended with the former escaping with 2 of the most important people among the raiders. That end, however, left the remaining members fearing desperately for their lives. And like how narrow-minded they were, in their minds, they started blaming the 3 that managed to escape for the demise that they were facing. There were a lot of them left. Nevertheless, no matter how many they were, they could only feel that they were no less than ants at the enemy in front of them. In horror, they could only watch as the enemy caught one of them on his neck and scrape his bloody face hard onto the cement. Even in this darkness, they could distinguish the bloody color left on the ground as the face of their comrade started to thin horribly. The skin on both his cheeks was gone. Even his nose and lips were torn to shreds. That was when they realized the guy stopped moving. Mark lifted the guy up. Sure enough, he was already dead. Tisk. Mark clicked his tongue. He failed to control his strength and ended up crushing the guy's neck accidentally. The guy died too easily. He was lucky. Mark turned to the others, causing them to flinch. The unsightly death of their comrade in his hands was enough to give them a deep mental scar. They all wanted to flee. However, without the capability of flight like Gregor, there was no way for them to leave this place. The only thing that they could do was to wait for their demise while watching the man in front of them. Mark, on the other hand, seemed to have another idea. You. One by one, Mark pointed at 11 people. Each of them could not help but shiver as they were pointed out. After all, they were the guilty ones of what Mark said before. They were the lookouts and curious ones that lingered the roof. ogling at May this afternoon. Mark then smiled. Those I didn't point out, let's play a game. Everyone became silent by reflex. As bloodthirsty raiders, they were not new to this kind of term, giving their victims a chance to live as long as they were entertained. The ones I did not point at, you will be the hunters. The others were targets. The hunters can bring me an eyeball of those the targets, I'll let them leave this place alive. Hearing that, the ears of the others perked up while those that were guilty of the crime started to back off. "Yes, sir. Will you really let us go if we did what you just said?" One of the raiders bravely asked Mark. "I'm not like you people. I will keep my word. One person per eye. I will not kill them and let them leave." Hearing that, those that were not pointed out by Mark turned towards those that he pointed at. Their eyes were not looking at their poor comrades. Instead, they looked like hyenas eyeing their prey. "Oh, by the way," Mark added, "take their eyes without killing them. Remember that." They heard what Mark said. Nevertheless, their bloodshot eyes did not waver. What was in their minds was solely their own survival. They would follow what Mark said to live, disregarding the heightened difficulty of the task. "Well, then. You guys can start now," Mark said as he walked out of the way. He climbed the back of the military jeep to oversee what was happening. And there, the chaos ensued. Everyone readied their weapons, although this time, they were aiming for their own comrades. The guilty ones immediately grouped up while retreating. They had the same circumstances at the moment. It was better for them to stick their backs at each other. While they retreated, they did not hesitate to fire at the others, forcing them to hide and take cover. Mark watched the play with a smile. With the rules he gave, barely anyone would manage to live. All of them had guns. However, the group aiming for the eyes would not be able to use their weapons to their maximum efficiency. Mark said that they could not kill the targets. Thus, they could only aim for their arms and legs. On the other hand, the targets could kill anyone as long as they could. Because of that rule, even though the hunter group overwhelmed the target group with numbers, they could not get any advantage. More than that, since they had more people on their side, it was expected for them to have a lot of casualties. Plop. As Mark was just thinking of it, the first casualty appeared. One of the members of the hunters was shot directly on his forehead as he tried to peek out of his cover. Despite that, however, that guy's death did not matter. One death meant one less competition. There were only 11 targets, 22 eyeballs. Only 22 people would be able to leave this place. A mutator among the hunters used a different tactic and circled the targets. He succeeded and got a clean shot on one of the targets. However, the shot hit the target's head, causing him to immediately die. Nevertheless, the mutator did not care. Using his dirty hands, he scooped out the dead target's eye. But then, before the mutator could rejoice, his view spun, and he managed to see his headless body holding onto that bloody eyeball he took. That was the last scene before everything went black. Everyone froze. They saw Mark appear behind the mutator and sliced his neck off. He then caught the head and, like magic, put it in a black hole in front of him. As I said, take their eyes without killing. The eyes from a dead target will not count. One already died. Only 10 targets remain. Meaning, only 20 might be able to leave this place alive now. Hearing that, the nervousness of the hunters grew. They stamped clearly in their minds that they should not kill any of the targets. Not only that they would die, but even the quota would also decrease. Because of that, the hunters became careful with their approach. On the other hand, the targets managed to get a breathing room. As the raiders were concentrated in the battle, none of them realized that Mark already entered their base, leaving them on their own. Mark really did not have much interest in watching the chaos he created, and rather, he wanted to see what he could loot in this place. Besides, he could monitor them without watching using his empathic detection. And another thing, aside from that Jersey devil, he was detecting another person of interest. The person was not like Gregor, though. Without a doubt, the person he was detecting was human. The person was not a psychic or an inheritor either. In fact, Mark was not sure about what he was detecting and wanted to confirm it first. Following his empathic detection, he ended up at the very same building that Kessler and his henchmen used. The whole place was dirty, and garbage could be seen everywhere. Ignoring the unsightly appearance of the interior, Mark continued walking. Along the way, he managed to encounter some raiders hiding. Not all the raiders in the building had gone out, after all, and some hid inside the mall instead. And those that hid, Mark killed them without mercy. Soon, he arrived at what seemed to be a staff room of the mall. As he peeked on the glass window on the door, he could see that the staff room had already turned into a prison cell. Mark broke the lock and entered through the door. Inside, there were 8 women. All of them were around teens to about the late 20s of age and were above average regarding their looks. Unfortunately, their beauty was already covered in bruises, dirt, and scars. Despite the weather, all of them wore thin, ragged, and dirty clothing. The only thing that was protecting the women from the cold was their thin, torn blankets. 3 of them turned to Mark while shivering, fearing the next thing that would happen to them. On the other hand, the eyes of the 5 of them were already empty, without any will to live. They only stared forward, not minding their future. Disregarding the other 7, Mark turned to a young girl shrinking herself on the corner of the room. Knowing that the attention of the person that entered was on her, the girl shivered from both cold and fear. Furthermore, the gunshots that they could hear from outside fueled their fear even more. That fat demon just played with her, and she was still in pain. She would not be able to take it if she was played with again. She could only cover her face and hide, wishing that the person would go away. But then, everything went silent in the room. Normally, when one was taken out of this room, there would be some resistance. The only exception was the 5 women that had already given up. She peeked out of her blanket, and to her extreme horror, the man was squatting in front of her, staring at her. But then, a question from the man made her wide-eyed in shock. Squatting in front of the frightened girl, Mark asked, "Do you know someone named Odalina?" Unable to believe what she heard, despite her fear, she asked, "Can you say that again?" I said, "Do you know someone called Odalina? Odalina Nadeja." After hearing that name, tears poured out of her eyes. Who are you?" she asked. "Why do you know my aunt's name?" That question made Mark shrug his shoulders. When he closed into this mall, he could not help but detect 2 interesting fluctuations. One came from something not human. The other came from someone familiar. The emotional fluctuations that Mark could detect were like DNA. Those that were blood-related had similarities in it. The closer the blood ties, the stronger the similarity. Of course, it was not always accurate. Sometimes, some fluctuations felt similar even though the 2 people were not related at all. That was why he had to confirm what he felt first, and it seemed that he was not mistaken. Then, what about Siegfried and Odette? Do you know them? Mark asked one last question. My cousins," the girl replied with even more shock. What a small world this is," Mark said with another shrug. He then faced the girl. "Want to come with me? I'll take you back to my base." Hearing that question, the girl hesitated. Although it seemed like this man in front of her did not belong to the raiders that caught her, it was not easy to just follow him. However, he mentioned the name of her relatives. It was something that she would not be able to ignore. Nevertheless, if it could bring her out of this hellish place, it was better. Grasping the last bit of hope was better than rotting in this place. As if knowing her intentions, the man in front of her reached his hand out. Slowly, she accepted the hand, and with his help, she stood up. Mark escorted the girl out of the room, passing through the other women. Seeing what happened, they wanted to catch the man's attention. However, their fear overwhelmed them more. When the man reached the door, however, he spoke. "The guys that caught you all will die tonight. All of you are free now, but don't leave this place immediately if you women don't want to die." After that, Mark and the girl left. The other women already lost the opportunity to ask for help and take them with him. At the main area of the building, Mark asked the girl, "What's your name?" Hannah. She replied. Well then, we better find better clothes for you first before finding a vehicle. With that, Mark took Hannah for a change of clothes before going outside. Hannah could not help but stare in front with shock and wonder. Everything was in chaos. And among the raiders, only 8 remained standing. Among the targets, only 7 were left alive, either unconscious or wailing in pain from their empty eye sockets. Those that remained were all injured. Nevertheless, they were still in a condition that could leave this place safely. Then, go, Mark said as the wall of miasma in front of them opened up. The 8 remaining raiders hurriedly rushed off, not even thanking Mark for the mercy he gave. Well, Mark did not need it anyway. Hannah, on the other hand, could see the sinister smile on Mark's face as he closed the wall once more. H. The frightened screams of the 8 raiders echoed in their ears. Mark kept his promise. He let them leave the place alive. However, outside, there was the battlefield of the infected and the evolved animals. They were destined to die no matter what. Day 127 to 6:32 p.m. Atlantic City Expressway Station, Hamilton Township, New Jersey, United States of America. By the time that the first flakes of snow fell, Mark already started the one-sided fight against the raiders. May, on the other hand, was left with the role of guarding the Queen-type Empress Spider and the survivors from Bally's casino. And for some reason, Arnold and the others were quite troubled by this. Although they had noticed it before, with Mark leaving them this time, the issue became more apparent. May was not interacting with them at all. At first, they thought that the issue was the men in their group. However, she was also not paying attention to Felicia and Sandy. The most that she would do was to smile at the 3 children with them. Aside from that, there was nothing else. Of course, she was diligent in following what Mark said for her to do and was keeping guard on them and the surroundings. Still, Felicia and Sandy wished that May would at least sit near them. Before the snow even fell, the temperature of the surroundings was already decreasing. At this time, the cold started to become a little unbearable. Being in a place surrounded by forests added further to the coldness of the night. Felicia and the others already huddled around the fire while cooking dinner. May, on the other hand, was sitting just behind the door of the police station, not minding the cold. They could not help but worry. Unfortunately, they did not know that Mark and May were blood demons. Blood was one of the main factors of the body to keep the right temperature. And for blood demons that had innate abilities related to their blood, regulating their body temperatures was already a reflex. May was not feeling cold, and that was why she was fine sitting there. Nevertheless, she looked like a maiden sadly waiting for the return of her husband that had gone to war. Miss. Soup. Sandy bravely came to May to give her a bowl of soup they cooked for dinner. Thank you. May replied and received what Sandy gave her. And there, Sandy could only retreat with a sigh as no interaction followed after. May ate the soup while looking at the snow falling outside the broken glass door. Unlike Mark, it was not her first time seeing snow. Coming from a well-known business family, they spent vacations and holidays out of the country. Unlike before, however, this time was different. She was not feeling cold anymore. The night was silent as the snow gently covered the surroundings. Or that was how it was supposed to be. Now and then, May had to come out. It was because their presence in the police station was attracting some of the infected to roam the area. With her guarding the place, the infected could not pose a threat at all. And since she had nothing to do, after every time she had to go out, she would wipe the blade of her sword clean with a cloth. Aside from the infected and a few feral evolved animals, there was no other threat that they would expect around here. That was what they thought. Just 20 minutes after Mark left, they heard a loud sound. Buuzzzzzzzzzzz. It was only coming from a single creature. Nevertheless, the sound was getting louder and louder, closer and closer. The group of survivors from Bally's casino could not help but become alerted. They immediately readied themselves if there was a need to fight. May also prepared. Taking out Oracle from her bag, the clear-colored bloodchild turned into her armor. Bam! All of them fell silent. Even May immediately hid once the loud sound in front of the police station echoed in their ears. Peeking out from hiding, May warily stared at the beast outside. A dragonfly. May murmured. Outside the police station, a gigantic and strange-looking dragonfly landed. Nevertheless, unlike most of the evolved animals and insects they had seen today, this one looked threatening, even more than the queen-type infected. Its sheer size could make anyone feel threatened. Just the dragonfly's head was already as large as a human's torso. Its thorax was as large as a family van. Including its tail, the whole body of the dragonfly was as long as 2.5 provincial buses. Not to mention the span of its wings that was longer than its whole body. Just the size of the beast was already frightening. But its appearance could make anyone flee. The dragonfly's black-colored mandibles looked like it was steel. Its 2 forelegs looked like black claws of a mantis. A black, spiky, and sinister-looking armor covered its whole thorax like a robe. The end of its tail looked like a scythe, ready to behead its prey. And unlike a regular dragonfly, its tail was moving sideways like a serpent's body. As it landed, the snow blew everywhere because of its wings. The cold wind entered the police station. Nevertheless, everyone could only stay silent as much as possible. Even though it was cold, they did not hesitate to extinguish the fire they had. If it could make things safer, a little cold was nothing. May warily watched the beast outside the police station. It wandered the place, looking around. When it saw nothing else, it walked towards the dead bodies left bleeding on the snow. Sure enough, it was attracted to the smell of blood from the bodies. The gigantic dragonfly started to eat the dead bodies. It looked like it would not go away anytime soon. After all, there was quite a large number of corpses outside. Aside from those that May killed, some were the ones they eliminated when they arrived in this place. May watched while trying to hide as much as she could. However, there was some lingering feeling that there was no need to hide at all. It was as if May looked up, she froze. The dragonfly was also looking at her. The dragonfly was aware that they were inside the police station. However, why was it not attacking? And there, May thought of something ridiculous. Readying her sword, she came out of the police station. Miss Felicia and the others could not help but panic. May came out. The dragonfly looked at her for a second. Then, it continued eating. Using its mantic-like forelegs to grasp the dead bodies, it bit off the corpses and swallowed piece by piece. May sat down at the steps in front of the parking area, watching the bloody scene in front of her. Without a doubt, this insect was intelligent. As long as there was food around it, it would not incite conflict. Besides, May was not prey, but also a predator. The loud buzz of the dragonfly's wings alerted more infected and feral animals to come to this place. As they had no capability of thinking, they blindly charged towards the 2 predators. May killed the ones coming after her. The dragonfly, on the other hand, only needed to wave its long flexible tail to dispatch the attackers. With the 2 around, the enemies were eliminated quicker. But then, the dragonfly could not help but look at May. It was because she started dragging the animal corpses. Then, she piled the corpses in front of the dragonfly. Afterward, she sat back at the stairs. Since then, aside from the sound of tearing flesh and blood splattering to the ground, there was silence. May blankly watched the supposedly threatening dragonfly. She did not even realize that snow started to pile on her head. Her job right now was to watch out for any threat, but with the appearance of the dragonfly, there was barely anything left for her to do. The dragonfly ate fast and soon finished eating. It then used its large feet to grab onto some of the remaining corpses. With a last glance at May, it flew away, sweeping the snow away from the area once more. As it left, May went back inside, and like before, she would go out from time to kill the infected outside. Everyone inside the police station managed to breathe in relief. While the dragonfly was present, they could feel like their hearts were in their throats, especially when May went out. If something happened to her, just how were they going to face Mark? Soon, they heard another loud sound. Vrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr parked in front of the police station, they all came out to check. Well, May was already ahead of everyone. As always, she knew if it was Mark without seeing him. In front of the police station, a Toyota Hiace minibus was parked. Mark came out of the driver's seat. No one around had seen how, but May was already embracing Mark, welcoming his return. "Welcome back," May said, receiving a pat on her head from Mark. Felicia and the others could not help but notice. May only looked alive if she was with Mark. "Did something happen while I'm away?" Mark asked. Even if he did not want to, he would notice a large amount of snow swept away from the front of the police station. The things around the area were covered with snow in a very odd way. As if the snow was splattered on the faces of the walls instead of falling on top of it. "Yes. A large dragonfly stopped by to eat," May replied. Mark wondered about what May said. After all, there did not seem to be any damage to the area. At least nothing that could compare to the scale of the snow that was swept away in the surroundings. "Tell me the details later." Mark smiled. "I brought back someone." May tilted her head in curiosity. Mark knocked on the passenger door of the vehicle. Receiving Mark's signal, Hannah alighted from the car. May tilted her head even more. "Odell?" "No, it's not Odell." Mark could not help but snicker at May's first impression of Hannah. That was what he also thought when the filth was removed from her face. Hannah looked a lot like Odelina. The difference was that Hannah looked younger and naive. If Odelina was like bamboo, hard to push down, Hannah was just a patch of grass, easy to trample. May was really confused. Nevertheless, the stories should be told inside the police station and not outside where it was snowing. Mark brushed away the remaining snow on May's head and beckoned Hannah to follow him inside. While following, however, May could not help but notice something on Hannah. The way she followed behind Mark was the very same manner as to how Odelina did. It was like she had been trained to do so. Relighting the fire, they heated the remaining soup they had for Mark. Luckily, there was more left over, and Hannah was able to have her share without needing to cook more. While eating, the stories from both sides were shared. When Mark heard what May did from Felicia and Arnold, Mark could not help but look at May with a reprimanding look. "It did not attack," May replied while pouting. I wonder if that is the beast that the raiders were talking about," Hannah said, warily joining the conversation. From what Hannah knew, there was a beast in this area. Anyone that saw it would not be able to leave alive. That was why there was no clear description of what it looked like. If that was the case, however, the dragonfly might be a different one. While they were talking, however, buzz, the familiar buzzing sound, accompanied by strong gusts of wind, was heard. Hannah and the others flinched, while Mark became alert. May, on the other hand, was quite curious. The sound stopped a bit in front of the police station. However, before any of them could go out, the buzzing sound echoed once more and left. By the time they went out, the only thing they could see was the silhouette of the large dragonfly flying towards the south. However, they noticed something lying in front of the police station. Everyone was sure that it was not there when they entered. Mark picked it up. It was a green-colored sphere with 2 red spots. The thing looked like jelly, but it was as hard as metal. Nevertheless, there was one thing Mark was sure about. It was an egg of a dragonfly. Day 128 to 8:11 a.m. Atlantic City Expressway, Hamilton Township, New Jersey, United States of America. Vroom. Early in the morning, a loud sound of the vehicle echoed along the expressway. The snow had already stopped. The sun shined brightly at the slightly cloudy sky. After a cold night, the group prepared to leave early. With Mark's instructions, they packed up as many supplies as they could from the convenience store. They managed to carry too much into the vehicle that it was full. Even the roof was not spared from being loaded. Having a vehicle felt better than walking. Furthermore, since it snowed last night, it would be much colder going on foot. Still, Arnold and the others were feeling a bit uncomfortable every time they remembered the uncanny surprise they had after waking up. Last night, they remembered that Mark drove a Toyota Hiace minibus. Even before they fell asleep, they could still recall that it had the appearance of a regular vehicle. Although there were rails on the windows and the bumper was a bit modified, it was still a regular vehicle. When they woke up, however, the regular vehicle was gone. The insides of the vehicle were still the same, but outside, it was already a tank with reddish-black armor. A sturdy ram was installed in front. Windows were more secured. The sides and even the wheels were covered for protection. There were even weapons that they, the passengers, could utilize from inside the vehicle when needed. Below the windows, several compartments were present where they could latch guns onto and fire outside. At the back of the vehicle, metal gas cans made with the same reddish-black metal was affixed. The roof also had a protected carrier that enabled them to securely put supplies in it. They could not fathom how it happened in just the span of one night. Furthermore, they could not think of where Mark got the material to modify the vehicle to this degree. Nevertheless, despite the discomfort, they felt safer inside the vehicle. Mark had demonstrated how strong the armor was, shooting a gun at it. They also had no problem with food and water. There was also enough fuel to go further than where they needed to go. Mark also brought back weapons and ammunition. Unlike their state from before, this was like heaven. If Mark did not appear in front of them, even if they survived that onslaught caused by their vice leader, they would have died of hunger. Still, while they thought that Mark could do almost everything, they could not help but become surprised that he was not able to do something properly. Mark was an awful driver. Even Hannah could confidently attest to this. It was not like he could not drive. Even though Mark knew how to, Mark was like high schooler playing on a racing arcade machine. If he was the one to drive, it would not be long for his passengers to have a heart attack. That was why this time, the one driving was one of the survivors from Bally's casino. He was called Otis. Apparently, he was a chauffeur from the casino before the outbreak. He was not able to drive anything after the start of the apocalypse. Even so, his skills had yet to rust. And Otis was glad that he could contribute something to the group since he was not adept at fighting. It was also best for Mark to not drive as he was the main fighter of the group. With Otis around, even if he needed to go out and fight, there was no need to stop the vehicle. In fact, it was the best choice. The vehicle was not a very silent one. Since it was the only one making noise along the highway, the sound of the car was severely multiplied. Along the way, it had drawn the attention of every danger they could come across the highway. And there, Otis had shown his driving skills after adjusting to the vehicle. They still had to stop after encountering large and fast-moving animals and mutated infected. For most of the infected, however, Otis was able to swerve the vehicle safely. Having a vehicle was surely more convenient along the expressway. Even with the dangers and abandoned vehicles along the way, in just 1 hour, they managed to travel a fourth of what they walked yesterday. Of course, it was not a smooth journey, especially when they had to manually remove the entangled vehicles that crashed against another at the intersection. There was even an upturned trailer truck that Mark had to destroy before they could pass. Inside the vehicle, May held onto the egg of the dragonfly carefully. Seeing this, Mark could only smile. "You really like it, don't you?" Mark said, making May blush a bit. May rarely asked Mark for anything aside from his company. She did not want anything, except Mark and her current family. Thus, May's current appearance was quite a sight to look at. Mark had Shaflar. It seemed that May finally found hers. Once the egg hatched, they could ask Annika to connect May and the dragonfly nymph that would hatch from that egg, if ever it hatched. Well, considering the heightened vitality of evolved animals, it was very likely that it would successfully hatch. Unless an accident happened, of course. Last night, Mark actually asked May if she wanted to catch the gigantic dragonfly. One yes from her would make him jump into action. However, she shook her head. The dragonfly was not an enemy, after all. Furthermore, it gave May an egg. Looking at the egg, Mark could not help but think. Mark already heard the story of the events that happened last night while he was gone. Thinking about it, there was nothing that May had done to be awarded such a valuable egg. Once it hatched, it could be anyone's powerful pet and ally. Considering that the mother was an intelligent evolved animal, it was reasonable to expect that the child would be smarter than the mother. But if one was to look at another angle, the angle of the mother dragonfly, this egg had no value at all. Dragonflies were known to lay their eggs somewhere and leave it to hatch by themselves. The larvae had to survive by themselves in the environment filled with predators. In fact, most insects, even some animals, did not value their children. In the worst cases, they would eat their eggs and offsprings. So, this egg was nothing but a thank you gift for the food that it was given and nothing else. Or maybe, from what Hannah said, the giant dragonfly might be the beast that frequented the area as its territory. Territorial animals of the same species tend to compete against each other for the best habitat. If that was the case, it was also likely that the dragonfly was getting rid of its future competition for its territory. That was very likely considering that since the dragonfly was a uniquely evolved animal, there was no way for it to have a mate. At least, not immediately. This egg might even be inside the dragonfly's body when it evolved, and might be the only one that survived the evolution. Mark scratched his head. The more that he thought of the egg, the more possible reasons and theories were popping up without concrete evidence. It seemed like it was better not to think of anything and just accept what was given as it was. Unknown to Mark, he was partly right in everything he thought of. The egg was of no value to the mother and the only egg that survived the evolution. It was also the only competitor that the mother could have in the future for her territory. Thus, it was given to May for that amount of unnecessary corpses. It was not for gratitude or anything. The giant dragonfly was just shirking future troubles. Driving through the outskirts of Hamilton Township that was filled with farming plantations, they had to stop. It was not like there was another blockade on the road, or there was a threatening enemy. Just the fact that the place was surrounded by plantations of edible fruits and vegetables was enough for Mark and May to stop by. After all, after the battle with the Great One, the fields around their base was devastated. They needed seedlings. And of course, more variety of fruits and vegetables. Driving off from the expressway, they took a turn at the right corner and entered an area surrounded by farm fields. Stepping out of the vehicle, Mark looked around. I guess this should be expected. Mark could only say that winter had just passed by in New Jersey. Of course, there would be nothing but weeds now growing at the farm fields. And instead of farmers, infected and dog-sized pests roamed the fields. Gerger, should we check the storehouses? May suggested as they eliminated the infected and the insects that started to attack them. Mark had the same thought. Maybe they would be able to find things inside the farmhouses or the storehouse. Taking out his phone, Mark checked the map. There, he saw something. Let's check somewhere first, Mark said as they boarded the vehicle once more. Driving further the road and a single left turn, they arrived at the destination that Mark saw on the map. It was a farm with a storehouse near the road and several greenhouses on the other side of the street. And of course, there were some infected. In the least, there was lesser than the first area. Mayor, guard everyone. I'll go check the greenhouse, Mark said as he patted her head. As May nodded, Mark left towards the greenhouses behind the farmhouse. Waving his swords along the way, Mark killed every infected that came running towards him. Arriving at the back area, he saw 6 greenhouses of different sizes. Unfortunately, among the 6, 4 were obviously destroyed. Despite that, Mark still decided to check. He did not care much about what or how many he would find. At least, he wanted to find something to start in restoring their fields around his base. It was more preferable if he could find seedlings. After all, even seeds did not have 100% guarantee of growing. However, it seemed that he was out of luck this time. He searched the 5 smaller greenhouses and found nothing but dead plants. Finally, he decided to check the last one. Why did he put the largest one last? It was not because he was not expecting to find anything inside it. And rather, from outside the greenhouse, Mark could see that the plants inside this one were overgrown. Overgrown in a very odd way, that the plants had broken through the confines of the greenhouse. Nevertheless, none of the plants sticking out of the greenhouse resembled an edible plant. Instead, Mark found it rather alien-like. Curled vines as thick as a child's arm, strange bulbs as large as an infant's fist. There were a lot of things to question. Carefully, Mark opened the door of the greenhouse. The strange overgrown plants made the door hard to open. Mark had to carefully cut off the plants to open the door with making much commotion. As Mark opened the door open, the insides of the greenhouse were revealed in his eyes. Mark frowned. At the center of the greenhouse, there was an infected. However, even if Mark was seen by it, it could not approach to attack at all. No, there was no way for it to do so. It was rooted in place, literally. This is new, Mark murmured as he stared at the abomination in front of him. It had been a very long time since he last saw a plant-based mutation among the infected. This time, however, it was more grotesque. Day 128 to 10:29 a.m. Edward Wuyerman and Sons Farms, Hamilton Township, New Jersey, United States of America. Mark stood by the door of the greenhouse, looking at the abomination at the center of the greenhouse. He could not tell if the infected could detect him or not. Although there was movement, he could not see any kind of aggression. Taking out his phone and turning off the flash, Mark took out some pictures. It had been his hobby since the outbreak started. Every time he could, he would take pictures. If not, he would engrave the appearance of the infected in his mind and draw an illustration later. In fact, the database about the infected and evolved animals inside his laptop was growing fast. That was the difference of this outbreak from what Mark knew from video games and movies. The number of possible branches that the infected could mutate to because of mutagen was infinite. Of course, there was some rarity among the mutations. Similar catalysts would mutate the infected the same way. And the more common the catalyst for the mutation was, the more likely that an infected mutated by it would appear. It was like the dozers, the infected that had fat, bloated bodies that would release methane when injured. A lot of them were among the infected everywhere. The catalyst for the mutation of dozers was already confirmed. It was the high amount of fat in the bodies of the infected before turning. Since obesity was common around the world, it was easy to find dozers almost everywhere. It was the same with other mutated infected. Now, Mark had seen a new one, and it was a very rare plant-based mutation. Thus, he could not help but feel interested. After taking photos, Mark switched his phone to video recording and started to record the interior of the greenhouse as he entered. From outside, what could only be seen was the vines and strange bulbs sticking out of the broken panels of the roof. Inside, however, rather than a garden, it was like a small jungle. Vines covered the walls and the ground. Large, green leaves filled the place. No one would think that it was a mutated infected unless they look at the center. At the base of the vines, a man stood still, with his arms outstretched. The base of the vines stuck out of the person's body, as if the entirety of it grew from inside him. From his eyes, nose, ears, and his widely opened mouth. The vines even stuck out in front and the back of his hole-ridden pants. In a short glance, anyone would think that he was dead. However, with the infected man releasing that creepy moans from his disfigured throat, there was no doubt that this infected was still alive. Furthermore, the base of the vines that were directly connected to the infected's body had a different appearance. Instead of looking like a plant, it was like some flesh membranes growing out of the infected's body. Mark looked up. He saw something. Fruits. That was what anyone would think at first. At the thickest parts of the vines above, several large things were hanging. However, each one was not only as large as a human, it was also pulsating disgustingly. With its fleshy appearance, it looked more like a cocoon than a fruit. Nevertheless, there was no doubt that these things were hanging connected to the vines. Out of curiosity, Mark took out his sword. With a jump and a slice, he opened one of the fruits. Splat! Mark immediately retreated as disgustingly smelling liquid burst out of the fruit. As the contents fell to the ground, Mark could not help but frown. The rotting and gastric smell spread across the greenhouse, making Mark retreat outside. Even for him, that was already used to encountering rotting corpses everywhere. The smell from that thing he sliced open just now was unbearable. If he did not retreat, even if he did not touch that thing, the smell would definitely stick to his clothes. Despite his quick retreat, he saw what fell out of that fruit clearly. It was a pile of digested human body parts. Those things hanging from the vines were not fruits but food. Then, if those things were all food for this mutated infected. As Mark had thought of that, the vines started to move like snakes. Sure enough, what he did alerted the infected inside of prey lurking around it. Crash! Crash! More glass panels broke as the vines surged out of the confines of the greenhouse. Then, the bulbs on the vines started to open, revealing huge flowers filled with barb-like teeth. Seeing that, Mark tried something. Mark ran, heading towards a corpse of an infected animal that he encountered while searching the greenhouses. Picking up the corpse, he threw it into one of the widely opened bulbs. As the bloody carcass entered the bulb, it closed. The vine that was connected to that bulb also retreated inside. Then, from the broken parts of the greenhouse, Mark was able to watch what happened inside. That vine that retreated moved and hanged itself on the roof with that closed bulb hanging on it. What a unique way of eating! Mark murmured. However, he also noticed something. The vines were moving everywhere, looking for him. It was even though the direction the vines were moving to was the opposite way. It can't see. That was what Mark concluded. A vine came towards him, but when he stepped aside, the vines continued moving the same direction and passed beside him. Mark returned his phone into his pocket. With a wave of his hands, black flames burst forth, igniting the whole greenhouse. It is a pitiful infected, but it can't be left alone. Mark murmured as he went back. Gerger, did you find any? May asked as Mark returned. Mark could only shake his head. He found nothing that they could plant, and as if they would plant an infected like that in his base. On the other hand, the others seemed to want to ask something as they glanced at the direction Mark came from repeatedly. After all, the thick smoke from the burning greenhouse was open for everyone to see. However, May did not ask anything. They felt that it would be inappropriate if they were the ones to ask about it. The next stop was the storehouse on the other side of the street. This time, everyone could help to look around. It was because there was a driveway in front of the storehouse where they could park the vehicle. Entering the storehouse, they could not help but feel dejected. There was no infected inside the storehouse. There was nothing of what they were looking for, either. From the looks of it, the storehouse had been emptied by other people. It was because the lock was forcefully broken, and the whole place was a mess. It was as if someone searched the storehouse in a hurry. The only things they managed to find were some old dried seeds that were quite questionable if it would still sprout. Still, it was better than nothing. They decided to leave. From Mark's map, there were still other places of interest if they were looking for things to plant. After, this whole area was filled with different farms. However, with this storehouse being obviously searched, the others being in the same state was very likely. Then, it was better to leave than waste their time. Maybe, they would be able to find what they were looking for elsewhere. Going back to the expressway, they left the vicinity of the Hamilton Township and entered the border of Winslow Township. And here, they finally entered the most populated areas around this place. Due to that fact, they noticed that the road started to become more and more crowded. Their speed slowed down because of the vehicles blocking the middle of the road. Most of them were abandoned because of an accident blocking their way. They even saw a vehicle half hanging the side of an overpass. The speed of their travel slowed more than half of before. Still, it was faster than going on foot. Because of this, it was already almost lunchtime, and yet, they were only in the vicinity of Turnersville at Washington Township. They should be looking for a place to eat now, since it would be questionable if they would be able to once they drove deep into the city. But then, Mark could not help but frown. Stop, help. A shout was heard from in front. As their speed was not fast, they managed to see the man far in front of them along the expressway. He was stumbling on his steps, and he was holding onto his right side that was covered in blood. With a desperate expression, the man stood in the middle of the expressway, blocking the vehicle's only path because of the other lane being blocked by an abandoned vehicle. "Sir, what are we going to do?" Otis cried out. In a few seconds, they would not be able to do anything but stop the vehicle. Actually, they wanted to help the man as he looked desperate. However, this was Mark's vehicle, and he was in charge here. And all of them were surprised by Mark's reply, "Run him over." But Otis had no experience in killing other people. Furthermore, he could not understand why Mark said that, if he did not want to help, they could just make the man stop blocking the way. "Otis, follow what Sir Mark said." Arnold suddenly joined in. "I don't feel good about that man. Don't hesitate." Hearing that, Otis inhaled deeply. He had never killed anyone aside from the infected, however, he could only obey. Stepping at the gas pedal, Otis sped up the vehicle. Hannah, Felicia, and the others closed their eyes as they braced for impact. Killing humans was something they had yet to experience. Thus, they were nervous about this. Arnold was the same. Nevertheless, he kept his eyes peeled open. He wanted to see if his hunch was correct. And there, when the vehicle was about to collide with the man. FCK. The man rolled to the side. None of his movements showed that he was injured or desperate. "Damn it." The man cursed once more as he took out a pistol from his jacket and fired at the driver's seat. Bang. Bang. Pang. Pang. Otis was shocked as the shots were aimed at him. The sound of the bullet colliding with something metal was heard loudly in his ears. When he looked to the side, he saw two shallow dents on the window. It was clearly the mark the bullets left after hitting the window. Unexpectedly, the windows did not shatter, and it sounded more like metal than glass. "Don't mind the bullets. Unless they shot from below us, the car will be fine," Mark said with a smirk. Outside, the man stared wide-eyed at the vehicle that continued to drive away. He could see the two bullets he fired that fell off in the middle of the road, leaving the car unscathed. With a raged expression, the man took out a whistle hanging on his neck like a necklace. Prrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr Brom. VRRROMM. From the hidden areas behind the buildings nearby and behind the forest on the other side, multiple sounds of engines from different vehicles echoed. Soon, the source of the sounds came out. 7 motorcycles, 2 owner-type jeeps, and 4 quad bikes. There was a total of 14 vehicles with about 30 people riding on them. All were armed to the teeth. Some had guns, some had metal bats. One of the jeeps even had a machine gun mounted on it. With crazed expressions, they chased behind the black armored vehicle. Day 128 to 11:32 a.m. Atlantic City Expressway, Washington Township, New Jersey, United States of America. Seeing the threatening group chasing behind their vehicle, except for Mark and May, everyone felt nervous. Furthermore, the sound when the bullets collided with the window surprised them to their bones. Everyone knew how close Otis was to dying. Fortunately, it seemed that Mark did not only tamper with the body of the vehicle but also replaced the windows. Mark calmly sat on his seat with his eyes closed. To use human compassion to lure the victims into the trap. It was a ploy that could easily deceive most people. Running in front of the victim's way while pretending to be injured, that inconspicuous abandoned vehicle that, coincidentally, blocked the other lane, that was the first part of the ploy. Even if the person driving was not compassionate to help the injured man, they would be forced to stop if they did not want to run him over. Once the vehicle stopped, 2 scenarios would happen depending on the response of the people in the car. If they tried to help the injured man, the assailant would be able to pick the most suitable person in the group of the victims. Then, take that person as a hostage. When that happened, it was very likely to be the end of the victims, and no conflict would start. The second scenario would happen if the people in the vehicle drove the man out of the way. There, the ambush would immediately start, trying to capture the victims violently. And lastly, if the vehicle did not stop like what they did, like what happened, the injured man would signal his comrades that were waiting, and a dangerous car chase would start. For the high-risk, high-return ploy, especially for the man that had to pretend to be injured, it was because there was also the last possibility to happen. That was if the passengers of the vehicle shot the man on sight for blocking their way. Mark could have done that last one, however, it was no fun doing so. Among the people inside the vehicle, it was Hannah, who was the most nervous. As someone who was caught by the same kinds of people before, it would bring unwanted memories back in her mind. She could only close her eyes and cover her ears in fear. But then, Hannah felt a hand on her shoulder. She opened her eyes a little and saw May, who sat beside her, consoling her. "Don't worry, it will be fine." May was smiling. With that confident and beautiful smile, Hannah started to calm down. That was right, this time would be fine. This thought entered Hannah's mind. It was different than the last time. Now, she was with someone that was able to kill the Hamilton Raiders alone. There was no way for the same thing to happen again. While Hannah was calming down, the group from Bally's casino was subjected to confusion. They could not fathom why, but May's treatment to them was very different from Hannah's. It was not like they were jealous. No, the men were quite envious. But that was not the issue. It was just that the difference in treatment could make anyone feel unsettled. Bang! Thunk! The unnecessary thoughts were immediately banished from their minds. It was because of the sound of another bullet that echoed from behind the vehicle. That was not the only one. Bang! Rat-a-tat! The armed group chasing behind started to rain bullets into the vehicle, making everyone even more nervous. However, despite how many bullets had hit the vehicle, there was almost no damage that could be seen. Mark finally opened his eyes. "Sir, what are we going to do?" Otis shouted from the driver's seat. He was quite panicked, but it seemed that he could still handle the steering wheel very well. "Just continue driving. We can't stop yet until we get out of the area under the guys behind." Otis followed the order and kept the speed as fast as possible. Nevertheless, not only him but everyone inside could not understand the rest of what Mark said, especially about being in the area under the enemies behind them. Furthermore, even though they were driving fast, it was a large car. Compared to the vehicles that were still far behind, it was slower. It would not be long before they were overtaken. Then, Mark spoke. "Mayor, shoot the guy on there," Mark said to May while pointing at the tall billboard in front. Asterisk asterisk. F asterisk CK. What kind of vehicle is that? The very same man, who tried to stop the black vehicle in front, cursed while riding at the back of a motorcycle. This was not the first time that the vehicle tried to run him over. However, the others were subdued after shooting at them a few times. However, for the first time, they encountered a vehicle that they could not damage, not even the wheels. Nevertheless, the more sturdy the vehicle was, the more they wanted to get it. A car impenetrable by bullets was hard to come by. Even bulletproof military vehicles were hard to procure without confronting the military. That was something that they would not dare do without them holding the advantage. The man took out a small radio from his waist. "Tower, get ready. The target is already coming your way." I know, I can see it. But what the F asterisk CK is that? The wheels are covered." An annoyed voice replied from the radio. "Just shoot it anywhere. Just don't shoot the engine or the fuel tank. Even they don't have supplies, that vehicle is valuable." The injured man shouted. "Then, it's fine if I kill anyone inside?" The voice replied once more. F asterisk CK. "You can do anything. Just stop that vehicle." "You said it all right." "Huh? Splat, talk attack." The man in the radio replied once more, but before he could finish his last sentence, the voice was filled with confusion. The last things heard from the radio a sound of splattering liquid and the radio clattering as it fell to the ground. Tower. What happened? The injured man shouted once more. SSSHHHHHHKKKKK. However, there was no reply, but some broken white noise. Boss, what happened? The man driving the motorcycle asked. Tower is not responding. Maybe he dropped the radio from the billboard again. It's not the first time. That idiot. He will get it when we get back. That was what they thought. Bang. A loud gunshot echoed in their ears. It was clear that it was a sniper shot. They thought that it was the guy on the radio that made that shot. Strange enough, there was only one shot. Furthermore, the black vehicle was still moving. Then they passed by the billboard. There, they saw a horrifying sight. The sniper post they built on the billboard had a huge hole on its walls that even passed through the billboard. And from the platform of the billboard, they could see blood dripping like a faucet filled with blood was left open. They could not fathom how it happened, but without a doubt, their sniper in that outpost was dead. The only culprit that they could think of was the vehicle they were chasing. To think of it, the gunshot seemed to have come from the vehicle and not the billboard. But there was another mystery. Even if they had guns, how did they find the sniper before he could even shoot? Some of the armed men started to have second thoughts. However, they already lost something. It was impossible for them to retreat without getting anything. Furthermore, it was not the only thing they had. Atlantic City Expressway was just a straight road in these parts. Nevertheless, the abandoned vehicles and the two following overpasses would obscure the view in front. At the third overpass, the Davistown Road just a 2 minutes drive away, they prepared a blockade. There was no way for their targets to continue on the road. In Mark's vehicle, everyone was surprised that Mark was able to find the sniper hidden at that billboard. It made them feel like there was no way for them to hide from Mark. Nevertheless, it was a very good thing for them. There was no threat that would be able to take them by surprise. Then, about a minute later, enduring the sounds of gunshots echoing behind, Otis shouted. Sir, the road is blocked. I know. I can see it. Mark said as he moved to the front passenger seat that was left empty for some reason. Mayor, let me borrow that. Mark said, pointing at May's shooting moon edge. May handed the large sword with a bit of difficulty due to the small space inside the vehicle. Receiving the sword, Mark opened a compartment in front of the vehicle. He docked the sword into the compartment after turning it into a sniper rifle. While everyone was surprised that it was possible to do this with this vehicle, they could not fathom how a sniper rifle would be able to help with the situation. But then, Mark took out something from his space ring. It was a palm-sized wooden board with a strange circuit-like markings on it. At the center of the board, there was a spherical indent. Mark then docked that board onto the top of the sniper rifle. And lastly, he took out an empty, mental crystal, and slotted it into the indent. Everyone, close your eyes. Otis, you too, but continue driving straight. Mark said with a playful smile. At the overpass of Davistown Road, there were 20 armed people waiting. By their usual routine, they blocked the road below, and they waited on the overpass to ambush any fleeing targets. Get ready. Here they come. The leader in charge of this group commanded as the target vehicle was on sight. At this point, the target was expected to slow down. The road was blocked, after all. Furthermore, the vehicles they used to block it was not just small ones, but the largest they could. Even if the vehicles of the targets were sturdy, there was no way for them to pass through without stopping. Sir, the target is not slowing down, one of the armed men said, noticing the speed of the target vehicle. Are they crazy? Another one said with ridicule. However, the leader did not say anything but frowned as he started to feel a dangerous sensation. As the target vehicle drove closer, the leader saw a sniper rifle sticking out in front of the vehicle. It was too obvious since the vehicle was black, and the sniper rifle was white. Confusion was the first thing that entered their minds. But then, the muzzle of the sniper rifle started to emit light. The leader started to instantly know that it was dangerous. Thus, without even alerting the others, he wanted to flee. However, as he took the first step, his body felt heavy, his knees were shivering for some reason, and it was hard to keep his balance, even just to stand. He could only turn his head back at the vehicle. There, he saw a man sitting at the front passenger seat. He had a sinister smile, and his eyes were glowing bright red. Thommm. A deafening sound, as if an energy cannon was fired, echoed in the surroundings. The last thing that the frozen men at the waiting in ambush saw was the blinding light that swept over the overpass from side to side. Crack. TSH. Mark shrugged his shoulders as he watched both the crystal and the board cracking and crumbling to dust. The material I had is really inferior, Mark murmured as the vehicle passed through the hole made through the blockade under the overpass. All of you can open your eyes now. Especially you, Otis. If you continue closing your eyes, we will crash. There's another truck in front. Mark said calmly. However, Otis was panicked. They almost hit the truck. Still, everyone was confused. When they looked behind, there was a look of shock on their faces. A path was opened up from the blockade, leaving the melted remains of the vehicles that were left there. And while the cement of the overpass was mostly intact, the metal railings were gone, along with the people waiting there to ambush them. Day 128 to 11:35 a.m. Atlantic City Expressway, Washington Township, New Jersey, United States of America. Screech. Crash. Bam. Loud, unpleasant sounds echoed along the Atlantic City Expressway. The outlaws were already close to catching up with their target vehicle. In front, the blocked overpass was also visible. However, all of them were utterly confused when the vehicle continued to speed up instead of slowing down. It was as if the targets wanted to ram their car onto the blockade. That was when the flash of blinding light deprived them of their sight. Some of the cars managed to stop, slamming on their brakes violently. Most of them, however, failed to do so. Especially for the motorcycles, there was no way for them to stop immediately while going at top speed. Thus, with the shock, confusion, fear, and being unable to see where they were going, forced the outlaws into different accidents. One of the two jeeps crashed into an abandoned vehicle. The front of the car was utterly mangled due to the strength of the impact. The driver and the passenger at the front seat immediately fell unconscious after their heads hit the steering wheel and the dashboard. For the other passengers of the car at the back seats, since they were all standing and shooting at the target vehicle and without any safety precautions, they all flew off everywhere. They all laid on the road injured. The unluckiest of them fell headfirst, bashing his head on the concrete like a tomato. All of the motorcycles crashed one after another. Both the drivers and back riders fell rolling in the middle of the road for several meters while their motorcycles continued to slide. Some only stopped after crashing onto an obstacle or just because of the friction. Falling at that speed, unless they were endurance-type mutators, they would receive grave injuries. Some of the drivers of the motorcycles definitely broke their legs after falling. As for the back riders, most of them had injuries on their arms since they tried to mitigate the fall by reflex. Two of them had their arms bent the wrong way in the wrong part. One of the back riders had the worst fate, though. After he fell, the quad bike following behind ran over him, breaking his arms and ribs in the process. The outlaw immediately died. As for the quad bike that killed that man, the driver and passenger were not left unscathed. Suddenly running over a bump, the killed back rider, at that speed, sent the quad bike flying. It was not high, just a few inches above the ground. That, however, made them lose balance, and the two rolled over together with the quad bike. Both were dead, with their mangled bodies. The other quad bike lost control and went over the gutter. It crashed onto the divider of the opposite lanes. The driver and passenger were sent flying onto the other side of the road. As for the others, the drivers managed to stabilize their vehicles. However, they could only hold their faces in pain afterward as their eyes hurt like hell. They could hear the painful moans of their comrades, but what could they do? Everyone was murderously staring at their target. and none of them was able to react to that blinding flash of light. Nevertheless, while that blinding light hurt their eyes, it was not enough to blind them permanently. After more than 10 seconds, they regained their sight, although their eyes were still painful. And there, instead of helping their comrades immediately, those that recovered their sights could only stare in front with their mouths agape. They also realized the unpleasant smell of burned materials that entered their noses. Their target was gone, and there was a huge, molten hole on their blockade. Similarly, the men that should be waiting on the overpass to ambush their targets were also gone. The outlaws could not help but shiver in fear at this scene. Just what if whatever that was pointed at them? It was able to create a hole through several vehicles. If it was them, not a single trace of them would be left behind. As their heads failed to process the scene in front of them properly, they succumbed to fear immediately. FCK. I'm out of here. The first cry of fear echoed as the man hopped into his quad bike, wanting to leave. Then, because of that man, the others that were still fine followed unconditionally. They did not care if their boss was among the people rolling on the ground in pain. They only wanted to leave this place as soon as possible. After all, while they liked killing others, they did not want to die. Ignoring everything, even the pain in their eyes, they hopped into their vehicles and turned around. But then, they were not able to move an inch anymore. West what? The road back, it was being blocked by a veil of black smoke. Overwhelmed by fear, they lost their reasoning. It was not known whether the black smoke was harmful or not, at least, unlike the vehicle they were chasing that created a melted hole on their blockade. Thus, one gambled on it. VRRROOMM. Squeezing the throttle of his quad bike, he rushed through the black smoke. The others that did not dare to gamble with their lives watched in fear. They felt a bit of hope when they heard the sound of the quad bike seem to have passed through the black smoke. Maybe, this smoke was not harmful at all. But then, AAAGGGAHHHHH, the blood-curdling scream of the man was heard, along this his quad bike that crashed onto another abandoned vehicle. That scream made the remaining men horrified to their bones. With the lead of one, they decided to ditch their vehicles. They started to run away towards the forest at the side of the expressway. Before they could do so, however, the black smoke surged towards them. All they could do was scream as their bodies were enveloped by the sinister, black smoke. Those screams did not give them any ounce of hope. Instead, the screams started from fear, had gone coming from pain. They could only scream. There was nothing else that they could do as their bodies started to fester. It was the same for those lying on the ground. Their already painful moans turned to screams of pain. In a way, those that died immediately after the accident were lucky. At least, they did not have to suffer the pain and fear while watching their bodies slowly rot to their deaths. It did not take long, and the smoke gathered into a small ball and flew away. At its departure, all that was left was the rotting corpses of the outlaws that were lively just a minute ago. Gerger, that. May did not know what to say. It was even more so for the rest of the group. The shooting moon edge was given to May by Mark after he finished it. However, she never knew about what Mark did just now. Haha. Mark laughed with a bit of a secretive smile. He opened the window and threw away the dust that was left on his hand. It's some experimental thing. It's not easy to make, so that's the only one I had. An experimental thing. Those words made the people inside the vehicle shiver. It meant that it was something not completed yet and could pose a great danger even to the user. What if that thing failed and exploded inside the vehicle instead? Mark shrugged his shoulders. It was easy to tell what was in the minds of the people here, even without his emphatic abilities. Still, Mark returned to his seat beside May without explaining anything. He wanted to let their imagination run wild for now. What they were thinking were true in a sense. What he used just now was a bit unstable, however, it was not to the extent of exploding or backfiring. The harm it could do at most was blinding both enemies and allies for a couple of seconds. After all, it was nothing but a high concentration of light with enough heat to melt metal instantly. The unstable part of it was that it was not supposed to scatter that blinding light like that. In the least, everyone that stood behind the user would not be affected by the blinding light. As for what it was, Fried called it something like a crystal converter. Yes, it was something that Fried created in Aerialis after the outbreak started on their planet. It was created with the help of Keeper, who was the original owner of the Psi Crystal. It was something that could be attached to the weapons they developed back in Aerialis. Pretty much like how Mark used it with May's sniper rifle. The palm-sized board that had circuit-like markings was capable of converting the energy within the crystal into certain attack elements. Specifically, what Mark created was called beam-type converter. The beam-type converter could convert the crystal into a beam of light. The size of the beam differed depending on the circuit. What Mark made was the one with the largest beam. However, the creation of these crystal converters was nothing to joke at. Every line in the circuit should be made in a precise manner. A single mistake would waste the whole circuit, and Mark would need to make another one from scratch. The biggest problem, as Mark had murmured before, was the materials to create this kind of weapon. These crystal converters were not meant to be disposable. In fact, some of the successful ones that Fried created made it to their final battle before everyone perished. However, the materials that Fried used to make the crystal converters back then was some rare metal that appeared in Aerialis after the outbreak. Mark had no way to get hold of that metal, thus, he tried to find a substitute. The property of that metal was that it was able to flow magical energy through it, even without the carved circuit. It was the very same property that the wood from the core of a spirit tree had. While Mark succeeded in finding an alternative, it was subpar. Mark was a good craftsman, even before the outbreak. Alana, who was his customer, could attest to that. Even the things he made after the outbreak were good. Then, the problem did not lie in carving the circuit, it was because of the material. After carving the outlines of the circuit, Mark needed to fill the carvings with powdered empty, mental crystal. However, while doing that step, it was rather common for the wood to crumble to dust before the filling was finished, as it was unable to contain the energy within the circuit. In creating the one Mark used just now, just how many mental crystals and pieces of the core of the spirit tree had he wasted? Furthermore, the finished product was still defective. However, when making this weapon, Mark discovered something. The metal that was used in the weapon they got from Huo Long Yu was able to conduct magical energy without problems. However, there was no way for Mark to dismantle the weapon he made for May just for something like this. Thus, it became one of his goals in the future. If he could get hold of this metal, he might be able to create something that was not defective even without the actual materials from Aerialis. With those in mind, Mark smiled. Crimson then appeared on his lap out of nowhere. "Done with them?" Mark asked. There was no need to answer, but Crimson wobbled as if nodding. Mark patted Crimson, and he vanished once more. Crimson is really like a shadow guard, isn't he? May said with a smile. Mark shrugged. What she said was true, after all. Now that there was no one chasing behind them, aside from some infected, everything went back to normal. No one pestered Mark about the crystal converter, either. Driving silently with a few bumps on the road, they reached Deptford Township. At the flyover at an intersection, they decided to stop and have a quick lunch. Day 128 to 12:22 p.m. North-South Freeway, Deptford Township, New Jersey, United States of America. Atop the flyover built over Clements Bridge Road, Mark's group stopped for lunch. It was not the best place to stop, cook their food, and eat, and in fact, it was better not to. It was because of the dried blood in the middle of the road that even the weather could not wash away anymore. Here and there, bones could also present, scattered like pebbles. However, since it would take too much time to search for somewhere better to eat, this was enough. Furthermore, since it was an overpass, the only directions that the infected could come from was the entrances and exits. Of course, unless the infected were capable of flight. Everyone all sat down in a circle while eating their lunch. It was rather good that the weather was a bit chilly, and the sky was quite cloudy. Even though they were eating in the open, they could barely feel the heat from the sun. Nevertheless, except for Mark and May, the others were quite restless for two apparent reasons. 1. They kept glancing warily at the direction they came from. It was easy to understand why. "Don't worry about anyone chasing behind," Mark said. "There won't be any." They could not help but look at Mark carefully. It had not been long since they met him. Yet, the surprises he showed them was overwhelming and out of this world. After they broke through that blockade, Mark did not say anything else about the armed people chasing behind them. That was why they were quite worried that those outlaws might still be chasing. But thinking about it, no one in the right mind would still chase after witnessing what happened. Another one of those beams could probably wipe out an entire armed battalion. What they did not know was that there would be no one chasing anymore because all of them were already dead. The other thing that Hannah and the others were worried about was the one sitting beside May, being fed by her. It was the queen type, infected. Seeing an infected sitting and eating with them was very surreal. They thought that all infected were carnivorous beasts that had no intelligence. But this one even started to get picky about its food. At first, Mark brought her quite a distance away, killing an infected and giving it to her. Unexpectedly, she turned away. Instead, she was staring at the others that were cooking at that time. Specifically, she was glaring at the pot they were using. Once they all had seated, the queen type looked at everyone and imitated them. She sat beside Mark, looking restless. She only calmed down once a bowl of food was given to her. Well, that turned out badly. Despite her bizarre actions, she was still an infected. She did not know how to properly eat and tried to gobble everything in one go. In the end, 2/3 of the contents of her bowl was wasted instead. Not content with what she ate, she tried to gobble up the food that was spilled on the ground. Of course, Mark did not let that happen. Reprimanding the queen type like a child, Mark managed to stop her. Instead, he tried to feed her. That was when May jumped in and volunteered to do it. From there, it ended up with this situation. Due to this, although they managed to cook and eat more food than before, they never felt satiated. Not to mention that they also shared the vehicle with the same infected. Although the queen type looked behaved, there was no way that they could let their guard down around her. And apparently, there was one more thing. "Felicia, are you okay?" While eating, Sandy, who was eating beside Felicia, could not help but notice. Felicia was staring at the northeast while eating. In fact, it was not hard to notice her since she was turning her head away from where her body was facing. Thus, that question took the attention of everyone. Felicia was the one taking care of Morgan the most. Everyone could see her dedication to taking care of him while he was still unconscious. Seeing her like this was quite odd for everyone. "Ah, no. It's nothing." Of course, it was a lie. There was something in her mind. "Come on. Say it." Arnold chimed in. "We've been together for 4 months already. We can tell that there is something wrong. Don't make us worry." Hearing that, Felicia smiled bitterly. Since she could see the concern towards her, she decided to share what was in her mind. "Well, it's just my parents' house is near here." Felicia took a deep breath. "Actually, I had a scuffle with my parents before when I was in first-year college several years ago. I ran away and started working independently. That is way before I ended up in Atlantic City. I haven't heard anything from them for years." Hearing that, everyone fell silent. Everyone here had their own circumstances, and this was Felicia's. In fact, aside from the people here that already lost their families in Atlantic City, some did not know whether their families were alive or dead. And the worst part, not only that their homes were far, but also none of them had enough courage to confirm the fate of their families. It was because of fear. They were afraid that they would see their families' incomplete bodies. Worse, to see them wandering the streets as an infected. There was the urge that it was better to not confirm it and just hope that they were still alive somewhere. But then, while everyone was silent, an unexpected question came from the most unexpected person to say it. "Want to visit your parents' house?" Mark said, staring at Felicia. Felicia could only stare back due to the unexpected question. In fact, while she reminisced, she was unsure whether she wanted to visit or not. What if she saw them dead? But then, Mark pushed her further. Since it is close here, it is better to check it now. Remember that I will be taking you all out of this country. No one can tell when or if you will be able to go back here. Felicia contemplated deeply. The others just kept silent and let her think it over. Won't it be a bother? You said before that we are in a hurry. Felicia asked. You said that it's near, right? Mark replied. Since it's nearby, it's not a bother. If anyone else's house is near the way we are going to take, it would be fine to stop by. Besides, I'm thinking of making a detour after we leave. We should find a place to spend the night early today? Everyone was confused. After all, it was just noon. They could still travel for about 2 to 3 hours before finding a place to stay. Seeing their confusion, Mark continued, taking out his phone and opening the map. From where we are now, it is not far and we will cross the Delaware River and pass the border between New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Past the bridge, we will immediately enter Philadelphia. I don't think that we will have a good time searching for a place to stay there. Now, they understood his reason. Philadelphia was the largest city in the state of Pennsylvania. Entering the city before dark. Why not jump into the Delaware River instead? It was more questionable if they would be able to find a good and secure place to stay there. No one could refute Mark's decision. It was better to take it safe than take a risk in the outbreak. Then, what's your decision? Mark turned to Felicia and asked once more. Then, Felicia closed her eyes and took another deep breath. Please. Lead the way then. After eating and resting a bit, sit beside Otis and tell him the directions, Mark said. Yes. Felicia replied. There was no enthusiasm in her voice, and instead, it was filled with uncertainty. After lunch, Sandy took Felicia's role in taking care of Morgan as she sat at the front passenger seat. Taking a U-turn at the junction road to the right of the northbound lane, they went down into Clements Bridge Road. And to say, unlike the Atlantic City Expressway and the North-South Freeway, Clements Bridge Road was very populated. Of course, not humans, but infected. The road they were about to take ran near different communities, like Glendora, and boroughs, like Runnymede. Just with those two places, there should be a population of about 12,000 people. The population of the infected might be lesser. However, comparing that number to a group of 16 people, it was already overwhelming. Of course, there was no way for that number of infected to be gathered in a single area. Nevertheless, if they were to create a huge commotion, it would not be surprising if they were able to accidentally call hell on earth. Furthermore, they were just passing by these two places. Their destination was quite further. The house of Felicia's parents was located in the eastmost part of Haddon Heights. It was more than 4 miles from where they eat lunch. Because of the number of infected, Mark decided to ride on the roof instead. After all, with the speed they were currently taking, it was hard to outrun the infected. Moreover, since the road was smaller, even with the lesser number of abandoned vehicles, there were too many blockades. It was not like it posed too much trouble, it was just annoying to deal with repeatedly. While dealing with the infected, Mark could not help but notice. It was quite a nice place to live in. There were a lot of houses. However, they did not look cramped at all. Even the smallest houses were large enough for a family to live in. Not to mention that almost every house had a very wide yard. The facilities such as malls, diners, churches, schools were also close to the residential areas, making it easier to access. Well, that was way before the outbreak. Right now, that very same reason made the place a hell of an infected hole. They took roughly 1.5 hours to finally make it through Runnymede and Barrington. It was lucky that aside from roadblocks of abandoned and crashed vehicles, they did not encounter any barricades or man-made blockades. Unlike the residential areas Mark passed through before back in the Philippines, it seemed quite impossible for this place to be barricaded considering the layout and style of the residential area. Thus, they did not have to take too many detours along the way. Soon, They finally entered the border of Haddon Heights. At this point, Felicia was obviously restless. The closer they got to their destination, the louder was her heartbeat. Seeing the place she was very familiar with, if one was to nudge her, she might cry. After all, the familiar places in her memory looked very different now. The lively streets became a deadly road. The beautiful houses were left broken and abandoned. The lovely neighbors were now carnivorous infected. The good things in her memories were being replaced with the current unsettling appearance of the place. Then, she realized, she was starting to doubt her decision to return to this place. If she did not return here, the good memories she had would not be replaced with the unsightly things she saw. However, they were already here. Turn left, right? Otis asked, snapping her out of her thoughts. Why, yes. It was the last 2 turns before they reach her parents' house. What would it look like? Were her parents still there? Both anticipation and fear filled her heart. Another turn, this time, it was to the right. A white modest house with a wide yard that contained an old playground. They finally stopped in front of the house of Felicia's parents. Day 128 to 3:48 p.m. Haddon Heights, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. A white house with a basement and an old wooden playset at the yard. It brought back the good old memories that Felicia had. Even the old picket fence that surrounded the yard looked the same, though most of it already broke because of the infected currently roaming in it. There were trees in front, at the back, and beside the house. Although the carpet grass at the front yard had already overgrown, it was definitely modest but good-looking. A typical old house in a beautiful-looking town, that was the feeling that the house gave out. The moment the vehicle stopped, Felicia jumped out. She began carefully checking the infected in the surroundings. Once she confirmed that the infected was not someone she was looking for, she eliminated them by herself for trampling their yard. Because the whole place was quite silent, the vehicle took the attention of the infected in a wide radius. Thus, Mark also joined the fray, though he made sure not to kill any that Felicia had not checked yet. They came to this place to check her family. At least, if they were found among the infected, Felicia had the right to choose what to do with them. More than 100 infected were checked and killed around the house and on the street. Unfortunately, or maybe, fortunately, not a shadow of Felicia's family was found. None of them could say whether it was good news or bad news. With a heavy heart, Felicia turned back to the house. Without a doubt, it was empty. Step by step, she approached the door. Felicia reached for the knob and twisted it. Clack. The knob was torn off from the door. Seems like the house had been broken through. Arnold said while pointing at the hole where the knob was placed before. Although it was not noticeable, there were markings that the door had been opened by force before. No wonder that it fell off after Felicia twisted it. With the knob broken, they could only force the door open with the lock stuck. After opening the door, the mood grew heavier. The whole house was trashed. They could tell with just the view from outside the door. Upon entering, the only thing that Felicia could feel was anger. The appliances were gone, all the cabinets were left open, and the furniture was overturned. Many things were left on the floor to gather dust. There were even shards of glass from who knows where scattered here and there. Felicia walked towards the living room. In front of the fireplace, she picked up something from the floor. It was a broken picture frame with a photo containing 7 people in it. In the photo, there were 3 children standing side by side in front of the adults. "Are you the one in the middle?" Sandy, who also looked at the picture frame on Felicia's hand, asked. "That's me." Sniff. Tears already formed at the corner of Felicia's eyes. Her emotions were in turmoil, with mainly sadness and frustration. However, she did not want to show weakness and tried to hold it in. "It's fine. Cry it out." Sandy embraced Felicia tightly. There, Felicia could not hold it anymore. Everyone else looked away. This display of hers was not something for them to watch. While waiting for Felicia to calm down, the others checked the house. It might be disrespectful to the owner, but they should check whether there was danger or things left behind in the house. Mark and May sat on the roof together while they wait for Felicia and the others to check the house. Hannah and the children, on the other hand, stayed inside the vehicle. Hannah was not close to any of them, and it was inappropriate for her to join them. Thus, Hannah could only wait inside together with the children. Of course, she was keeping her guard up since they were alone with the unconscious Morgan and the restrained, Queen type. While looking around the surroundings with May, Mark noticed something, making him jump down. "Gerger?" May asked with confusion. "Wait there a bit. I'm going to check something." "Okay." With that exchange, Mark stepped into the backyard surrounded by broken fences. Then, he walked to the back of the house. It was where the outside entrance of the basement was located. What made Mark approach it was because the cover looked strange. The entrance was blocked by a sheet of metal and heavy things like wood and rocks. That was already strange. However, what made it stranger was that the cover looked like it was placed in a hurry. It was as if the one that put the cover was running away from something. Creak. Clack. Tang. Different sounds echoed as Mark removed the heavy items on the cover. Arnold and the others could not help but go out to see where the sounds were coming from. When they saw Mark, they could not help but wonder what he was doing. Mark then looked at Arnold. "Can you look inside if there's an entrance to the basement?" "Ah, okay sir," Arnold hurriedly replied. He immediately went back inside the house to check. While Arnold checked, Ernst and the others helped Mark bring away the things on the metal cover of the entrance to the basement. Bam! Bam! Ernst and the other survivors from Bally's jumped back in fright. The sound came too sudden, and it was from the other side of the entrance they were trying to uncover. "What the hell, that almost gave me a heart attack," Ernst complained. The other survivors could only agree with him while looking at Mark, who did not react at all. Despite that, there was one thing they confirmed. There was something inside the basement. They could not help but become wary. Soon, while the banging sound continued, Arnold came back. "Sir, there's an entrance, but the way to the door is blocked with a lot of things. Some are nailed to the door." Mark nodded and looked at the others. "All of you should get away a bit," he warned. Most of the heavy things were already removed. Mark could open the metal sheet by pulling it away in one go. Once he did that, whatever was making the noise inside would surely rush out. Bam! As everyone watching retreated, Mark pulled the cover away. The moment that the entrance was opened, a shadow rushed towards Mark ferociously. Mark took a step to the side, avoiding the attack entirely. As the attack missed, the attacker was stopped and turned, facing Mark and the others in a ragged manner. It was an old woman who was heavily emaciated. She almost looked like skin and bones. Her eyelids almost stuck to her eyeballs, and her cheeks took the shape of her gums and teeth. Due to her being too thin, her remaining clothes were hanging too loose, revealing her chest that was nothing but ribcage. As for her hair, there was barely anything left. If not for the fact that she was not wearing anything below anymore, no one could tell that this infected was a woman. Furthermore, without a doubt, it was a mutated one. The infected's nails were like claws, and despite her appearance and stature, she moved like a cat. The infected woman charged towards Mark once more as he was the closest to her. Mark took another step to the side, making the attack miss once more. This time, Mark shot a blood whip around the woman as he dodged her attack. It immediately turned into metal, which disabled the infected woman from moving. As the woman fell down to the ground, Mark pulled her up and turned to the survivors once more. "Arnold, hold this. Then, call Felicia. Since this is imprisoned inside their basement, maybe she knew her." Mark then handed the infected to Arnold, who looked too repulsed to even get close to the infected woman. However, since it was Mark's orders, he could only accept. While they waited for Felicia, Mark entered the basement. The first thing that Mark noticed was the awful smell coming from inside. It was the smell of mixed blood, feces, and urine. There was also the smell of rotting flesh. Almost all infected smelled this way, especially the biters. Thus, if they were enclosed in a small space like this repulsive smell would seep inside that space if not cleaned regularly. Covering his nose, Mark peeked inside. It was dark, and he had to take out a flashlight from his space ring. Actually, with the infected woman running out, no one would try looking inside. However, that infected woman was a mutated biter. She was a living infected. That meant that she had something to eat inside the basement that made her last long. If not, she should have turned into an eater long ago for dying from hunger. Mark was not wrong. With this rotten smell, there was definitely a source of its food. The question was it a what, or was it a who? There was also a chance that it was an animal, after all. The basement was surely dark. Mark could only walk slowly, in order to not step on anything disgusting. And there, at the corner, Mark found the source of the foul rotten smell. It was a decaying rat about the size of a husky. Fortunately, there were no human corpses inside. If there was a human corpse here inside the basement, there would be a huge chance that it might be one of Felicia's family members. Mark soon went out. Outside, everyone had already gathered around, and from the atmosphere, it seemed that Felicia knew the infected woman. She was kind of feeling down. "So, you know her?" Mark asked, pointing at the infected woman struggling in Arnold's grasp. "Yes," Felicia replied. "She's our neighbor. She lives on the house on the other side," she said while pointing at the abandoned house just on the other side of the road. "She's a kind woman. She and her husband could not have children, so she often played with me and my siblings when we were young." Felicia knew the woman. Fortunately, although it was someone close to them, she was not one of her parents. "Sir, did you find anything else inside?" Felicia asked. After all, even though just corpses, her parents might be inside. "There's nothing aside from a rotting dog-sized rat," Mark said with a shrug. That, however, was sort of good news for everyone. "It won't be long before it gets dark. Let's just spend the night here, is that okay?" Mark asked Felicia. After all, it was her parents' house. Felicia nodded. Rather, she had no reason to decline. Even though the house was already trashed and empty, she wanted to spend the night in her parents' house for one last time. While clearing the house to be suitable enough to stay for the night, time passed by quickly. They could not help but wonder why Felicia's neighbor was trapped inside their basement. However, no matter how they think of it, they could not find any answer. Looking at the clues like the heavily barricaded door to the basement inside the house and the hurriedly covered entrance outside, Mark had a hunch. Of course, it was nothing but speculation. And then, while sweeping the living room, Amy, the girl among the three children, came across something. It was a crumpled piece of paper that was inside the fireplace. Most of it was charred, but a large part was still intact. Out of curiosity, the girl opened it. The contents were barely readable because of being partly burned, but there was one thing for sure. "Miss Felicia." Amy immediately called out and ran towards Felicia. She then gave the crumpled paper. It could not be read clearly. Furthermore, it seemed that it was written in a hurry, but definitely, it was a letter. A letter for Felicia and her siblings. Day 128 to 5:42 p.m. Haddon Heights, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. Receiving the very last thing that might give her any clues about the whereabouts of her parents, Felicia hurriedly sat to read it. Just the handwriting on the letter was enough to make her tear up. It was from her mother. Felicia did not doubt it. The unfortunate thing, however, there was barely anything of importance that could be made out of the letter. If it was left out somewhere in a proper manner, even if it took years, the writings on the paper should still be readable. However, not only that the paper was found inside the fireplace filled with soot and ash, it seemed that whoever threw it there tried to burn it. In that case, it was already fortunate that the paper did not burn entirely. The only intact part of the letter was the top part of the paper. On the other hand, 2/3 towards the bottom were entirely illegible. Nevertheless, for Felicia, just to see her name among the names of her siblings was enough for her to feel guilty. She did not contact them for years, and yet, they did not forget to include her in the letter. It was even though there was no tangible possibility that she would be able to return here. Felicia tried hard to read the letter. It was for naught. What did it say? Arnold asked, seeing Felicia's expression. In response to that question, Felicia only shook her head in dismay as she handed the letter to Arnold. As he read the letter, he could only frown. He even moved towards the window to use the remaining sunlight to see if it would reveal more letters. The sun was already setting, though. Thus, it did not help much, not to mention that the area was filled with trees, further blocking the sun that was about to set. Use this, Mark suddenly said as a crystal flew towards the table. Everyone was amazed by the magical sight. The children even wanted to touch it. Of course, the adults prevented them from doing so. The crystal then released a bright light at Mark's snap. Ignoring the magical sight, Arnold moved the letter to the crystal. Because it was burnt, it was still unreadable. However, the light managed to reveal some words that they were not able to see earlier. Aside from the intro stating how much Felicia's parents loved their children, they managed to make out the crucial keywords like evacuation, YALE, and military at the burned part of the letter. There were some mentions about the neighbor too. It was probably about the infected neighbor in the basement, but it was unreadable. A military evacuation, huh? Mark voiced out after he was handed the letter to see it. As Mark said that, however, except for May, the others stiffened. Military evacuation. These two words were something they longed to hear about in the past 4 months of their struggles. Some of them were trapped in a casino while being surrounded by the infected. One was caught and was being used as a toy by the raiders. Who would not want to hear such words that could give them salvation? Unfortunately, they never saw a single soldier appear to help them, not even their shadow. Thus, these words should mean salvation but felt foreign to them now. Ignoring their stiff reactions, Mark asked, "Do anyone here know what YALE meant?" And to that question, pretty much every one of the survivors from Bally's casino reacted. "That's the learning school for special children, right?" Ernst said while a bit unsure. It seemed that while he knew, he was not too familiar with it. That should be it. There are various campuses around here, after all. Sandy voiced out. "I see," Mark said as he turned to Felicia. "Do you know where is the nearest one?" Wiping her tears, Felicia stared at the table to think. "It's been years. I don't remember exactly, but I think there should be one in Audubon." Mark took out his phone and started to search for the map. Unfortunately, nothing turned out on the search. It was because Mark did not expect to find himself in this place before the outbreak. While he downloaded the most data he could for the maps of the Philippines and countries he was interested in, the data on the other countries was the bare minimum. Nevertheless, he managed to see the potential area using the satellite image. "I guess we'll be checking it tomorrow," Mark voiced out as everyone turned to Mark. "What?" Mark asked as he questioned them for their expressions. "Nothing," Felicia spoke. "We're just surprised that you want to help me find my family." After hearing those words, the others nodded in agreement. "I don't really mind since it's nearby. If any of you ask me to go to another state or a different direction from where we are going, you can go alone." Mark then handed the letter back to Felicia and continued. "Besides, it mentioned the military. I want to get more information, especially about Philadelphia. I don't want us getting delayed further just because we ran into a threat there that we don't know of." "But you sir should be able to handle it, right?" Ernst suddenly spoke, though what he said was met with a glare. "Don't try to flatter me. You can consider me as someone strong, but I'm not the strongest." To the eyes of these survivors, Mark might already be a godly being. The prowess he showed them was not something that just anyone could contend to. That was because they had not seen anyone stronger. Compared to many other things that Mark encountered before and the entities in Freed's memories, he was still way weaker than many of them. The Great One, the founders of Ouroboros, Bathala, the deity of bloodshed, Garvlam, and the Eyes, all of them were far stronger than Mark. Going back to it, Mark only managed to absorb the deity of bloodshed using unconventional means. He tried to possess him, and that was why he won. If they actually fought until the last ounce of their strength, he would surely lose. It was the same for Garvlam, the volcanic deity. He only managed to defeat him because he was still weak after he was summoned back to the surface and the conflicting nature of their abilities. If they fought when Garvlam was at his peak strength, there was no guarantee that Mark would have won. "Prepare dinner and rest early," Mark then said as he took May out with him. Felicia and the others had not finished cleaning, after all. While cleaning the house, they were mostly silent. They were thinking about what Mark said to them earlier. Even though he fought with hundreds of mutated infected that they struggled to fight even a dozen, he was still not confident with his strength. They could not help but think of what creatures could possibly be more powerful than him. But then, since nothing could enter their minds, they just decided not to think about it too much. There was no point in thinking about it since they were sure that they would never reach Mark's level. Freed from those thoughts, Sandy turned to Felicia, who was sweeping the floor. "Felicia, I'm just curious. What is it? How come that you did not see your parents for years? The distance from here in Atlantic City is not really far back then." Felicia hesitated to reply. "I don't have the face to meet them." "Why?" Sandy asked. Although it might be inappropriate to ask, her nature as a regular housewife was irked. Felicia was hesitating to answer. It was the memory that she did not want to relive. It was the memory that she tried to lock down inside her mind. However, she also wanted to let it out. Locking it inside never did anything good to her. Back then, even if she wanted to tell her story, no one would listen. That was why she did not bring it out until now. Now, however, someone was willing to listen to her. There, the hesitation vanished. "Well, if you are willing to listen to how this unfilial B*TCH trashed her life, I guess. I don't mind not sharing it anymore." Sandy was stunned. In that sentence, Felicia's guilt, regret, and self-hatred gushed out. She even addressed herself with an unsightly name. Because of this, Sandy regretted bringing the topic out. However, she already asked. There was no point in backing out. The only thing she could do was embrace Felicia. "Dear, don't call yourself like that. Look, everyone is looking at you, worried." Tears welled up on Felicia's eyes once more. How long did she wait to be consoled like this? Felicia was the second child among 3 siblings. She was also the first daughter. Her parents did not treat any of them ill, but being the second child and the first daughter gave her more privilege than her 2 siblings. Thus, it was not surprising that she grew up quite spoiled and rebellious. Despite that, however, everything was fine. Felicia was a smart child. She was not at the top of the class. However, she was still hovering at the border of the intelligent and the average. In her last year of high school, however, things started to turn. Felicia found a boyfriend that she loved the most. There were no problems with it, except the fact that her parents did not like him. The next year became harder when she entered college. Her parents did not stop telling her to leave that man. It was until her parents told her that they saw him with another woman. Felicia got angry, thinking that it was another plan of her parents to foil their relationship. Felicia got into an emotional fight with her parents. That very night, she ran away from their house and eloped with her boyfriend. That was the first time she experienced hardships. She did not want to drop out of school and decided to take on jobs that she was not used to. Luckily, her appearance made it easier for her to find work. Sometimes, though, she was being hired with ill intentions behind it for the same reason. After she was almost raped at her last job, she finally dropped out. They decided to move to Atlantic City by the suggestion of her boyfriend as there should be more opportunities there. That was the worst thing she could have agreed on. Atlantic City. The actual reason her boyfriend chose to move here was because of his other lover. Felicia saw them together, flirting several times. However, she was afraid to lash it out to him. She did not want him to leave her. One day, however, her boyfriend did not return home. After waiting for another day, thinking that he was spending his other woman, she decided to find him in her place. The woman was also gone. There was no need to ask anything. Anyone would know what happened. Crying, she returned to their apartment, only to find it trashed with several men in expensive suits waiting. There, She learned the horrible truth. Her boyfriend incurred millions of debts in the casino. Now that he ran away, there was only one person left to pay for it. It was the girlfriend, Felicia. Thus, she ended up working at the casino, to the point of selling her body to wealthy customers for money. She even got pregnant once. With nothing else she could hold onto, she wanted to keep the baby. It was even if the father was unknown. But the casino ordered to abort it. She tried to resist, but she was drugged. The next thing she knew, after she woke up, the baby was gone. Inside the casino, she was seen as one of the best merchandise. Outside, she was seen as a disgrace to women. Years passed like that. Thus, until the outbreak came, she was working there with both mental and emotional scars. With this kind of life, what face could she let her parents see?